Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL in Choice, I would like to welcome you to today's program, which is part of the Socially Distanced Library series. Today's webinar is titled Physical Spaces, Transition Tactics, and a Look at the Data, and it is sponsored by Taylor and Francis. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL in Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I would just like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you should be able to follow along with the presentation materials. Along the right-hand side, you should see a Q&A panel and a chat panel. You can open and close those using the little arrows by the names. It's really more of an expand or contract them. If you have questions for our panelists, we'll take some time at the end to address as many questions as we have time for. So please do put your questions in that Q&A panel throughout the presentation. And if you're experiencing any technical issues, that's what you can use the chat for. I will troubleshoot whatever the issue is with you there privately. Also note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who signed up should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archived version within about 24 hours of the presentation. All right. So our presenters today are Rossana Morriello, who is the Research Support Librarian at the Polytechnic of Turin. I'm not going to try to say that in Italian. Natalie Haber, who is the Online Services Librarian at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. And Brian Doherty, who is Dean of Jane Bancroft Cook Library at the New College of Florida. All right, I'll keep the intros short today. And with that, we are ready to get started. So I will pass the ball over to Rossana.
Okay, thank you. I will start with a quick few words about the situation in Italy at the moment, and then show some data that in different institutions are collected, and then finish with some reflections that maybe we can share with the audience if there will be questions or feedbacks. Libraries in Italy were closed on March 8th after a special law for coronavirus, and they were allowed to reopen partially and with limitations since May 18th with another law. Now libraries are still open to the public with limitations. That is, patrons are asked to reserve books previously by phone or other channels, then fix an appointment with a librarian to go and pick the book, and the same procedures is asked to access reading rooms because physical distancing must be guaranteed. As news, in July, the government issued a special law, another of the many special laws, to support libraries as well as bookshops, publishers, museums, and in general the cultural institutions, particularly for the acquisition of book materials for libraries. 30 million euros were allocated by the government to support libraries in acquisitions, provided that they buy from local bookshops or vendors, because the aim is to support at the regional level the cultural institutions. During the lockdown, almost all activities were closed. That is, from March to May, all cultural activities were closed, and most commercial activities were closed, apart from supermarkets, food shops, and pharmacies, and a few other shops. Universities and schools were among the first institutions to stop activities and suspend teaching. That was soon moved to remote mode. It was at the beginning of March, soon after libraries were closed too. So digital was the only road to access to culture and information for those months. Many institutions so collected data during and after the lockdown about libraries and about the use of digital resources in general. The first study I will show, and you will find the complete reference in the last slide, even if it's in Italian. The data are in Italian. I translated them for these slides. And this is a survey that some colleagues, librarians at the National Research Council in Pisa, collected, asking to librarians many questions. I selected some which are relevant for this talk. They got answers by 1,134 libraries. And one of the questions they asked was about how the way in which they worked during the lockdown. And as you can see, most of libraries of any kind of libraries worked in remote working, but not all of them. Some librarians went to the libraries physically, and some of people who answered that they didn't work in a remote mode, maybe were at home anyway, but they had to take leaves like holidays and other kind of or leaves anyway they were at home. This means that many activities in libraries were not done, and many were done only or mostly in a digital way. For example, reference service was mostly digital, especially by email, then social networks and website chats, and also materials available in libraries during the pandemic, actually during the lockdown, were mostly in electronic digital format, is the orange line, even if there were some print materials when, as I said, some librarians went to the library maybe a couple of days or a week, and some organized loans by delivering to patrons' home directly the material. Other interesting data are about library acquisitions. 43% of libraries didn't make acquisitions, and 28% made acquisitions only partially, which means that 2/3 of libraries didn't acquire materials as they do normally. And this means also that vendors and publishers couldn't sell to libraries, but also that vendors and publishers were closed to, in many cases, or also working in remote ways, so they didn't sell, or even they didn't publish, because a lot of materials that was supposed to be published in the first days of 2020 were not published. And we will see later data from publishers that say also that. Other activities that this survey, national survey, detected were in libraries were lending, mainly of course digital, information literacy and instruction, communication with patrons and media through websites and social networks that were quite important in the lockdown, managing and updating library websites, and training. Among librarians, 65% used social networks to communicate with patrons, but also to promote services like digital services that not always were well known, maybe by all users, and also to organize some activities like book readings and other kind of activities in a digital way, like in videos, and they use the social networks to spread. And you can see that Facebook is, of course, the most used. The Observatory on Libraries and Sustainable Development of the Italian Library Association, of which I am a member, collected some data on the use of digital resources, asking to producers and asking them to compare data from the months from January to April 2020 with the same period, January-April of 2019. The Observatory has the aim of raising awareness about sustainable development and the Agenda 2030, and with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations established in 2015. So why did we collect data about digital access to digital resources? Because access is one of the key points, one of the key issues in sustainable development, as IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations, stated in many documents and summarized in this poster, which shows the importance of access to information, both in print and digital formats, in many targets in all the 17 SDGs. So we asked data to a couple of platforms for digital lending, the most used in Italy, which are Media Library Online and Rete Indaco, and they show an increase in the use in downloads, logins, and loans of books and other digital materials. As you can see, of over 100%, and the same for Rete Indaco. And we asked also, we received data by the National Library Service, the National OPAC, which has a smaller increase because they don't give access to full text materials, but anyway, it's quite interesting. But we have also an increase of over 116.25 for the Italian Digital Library, which is a platform maintained by the Ministry of Culture, which has a lot of digitized materials, books, journals, and manuscripts, maps, and images. So with access to the text, the full text of the materials. Also, publishers show an increase in the in access and downloads. And if we have an increase in digital downloads, we can see from data by the Italian Association of Publishers that there was a decrease in book selling. In April, there was a decrease of 20%, minus 20% in total revenue, which was 11% in July, so there is a slow recovery to normal levels. And they also recorded a 44% increase in selling by web channels as compared to 2019, which means that probably many people started buying through web channels, and probably they will continue. On the other side of the platform, that is not from the producers, but from the users, we have data that show that cultural consumption, there was a preference for digital formats for newspapers and journals, and there was an increase in that, but still for books, we have a preference for printed books. So the increase was not so important. Another important set of data is about remote learning from the point of view of students, because students at the beginning of March were suddenly moved to an online environment for their lessons in schools and universities. And we can see from data by the Italian National Authority for Communications that about 19% could follow lessons from home, but only 70% with continuity. And if 40% had no problems, 60%, that is the majority, had different kinds of problems, like connection speed, difficulties in using software for remote learning, not enough space at home, because we must consider that students were at home, but also maybe parents were at home. So if we think of a family of 4 people, we had maybe 2 students who needed a computer for their lessons, and 2 parents that needed a computer for working. So they needed for computers and enough space at home, and also a fast connection, a large bandwidth able to support for connection for computers connected for a long time during the day. We have also some data of after the pandemic, after the lockdown. Actually, the pandemic is not maybe finished. Like the National Library of Florence, which reopened on May 20, and recorded an increase in the number of library cards and an increase in the number of library cards that were renewed or asked for new services, which could mean that, and also other libraries actually recorded and talked about an increase in the number of users, which could mean that some new people discovered the library during the lockdown, because it was the only, still was a way, a channel for access to resources, a very important channel. We will see, actually, at the moment, we cannot say anything for sure. It's too early to say how will be the future, because we are not sure about the development of coronavirus in the next months. In these days, we are again having an increase in the number of cases of coronavirus. We were almost close to 0 in the last weeks, but now they are slowly, not so much, but anyway, they are increasing, because people are not taking any measures. They're not wearing masks. They are on holiday. They live as an everyday life without any consideration. Universities and schools are organizing a mixed mode for teaching since September, partly in presence and partly in remote mode. So academic libraries should plan their activities to support these new modes. And but anyway, we don't know if the shift to digital use that many data collected show will be structural, if there will be a real transformation in libraries, in the way users access to resources. So it's something we must think about and monitor. Librarians need to study data collected from different institutions and try to transform the pandemic in an opportunity to develop new services and also maybe to rethink and reassert its identity of cultural hub that many also probably discovered in these months. These are the final with all references, and thank you.
All right, so thank you, Rossana. That was very interesting. I'm going to take over and talk about online library instruction. So this is really geared towards those who need to make a speedy transition from face-to-face instruction, if that's what you've been more comfortable with in the past, which I think is the majority of libraries right now. So my name is Natalie Haber, and I'm the online services librarian at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. I've popped my picture in there because my video is off today because I am recording from my mom's basement and it's not super pretty to look at. So I've been in my current position for about 6 years. I don't know if that makes me an expert at all, but I certainly have quite a lot of experience creating online instructional materials and maintaining instructional materials. And I'm on a team of librarians. There's 5 of us. And I'm really the only one who does the online stuff. So these tips that I'm going to share today kind of are also what I'm telling some of my teammates as they're preparing for the fall semester. So in this talk, I'm hoping to discuss creating an inventory, tactics for creating content, finding and reusing content. And kind of my goal today is that even if you're not an instruction librarian, after this, even you could pull it off, right? So this is part motivational speech, right? This is going to be fine. We're all going to be fine. We're going to get through the fall, and it's part kind of hands-on tactics that you may find useful as you're thinking through your fall semester. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is this idea of creating an inventory of what you've got. So again, I'm on a team of only 5 people, but when we sat down and put together an inventory this summer, it turns out we already have a ton of stuff created. And I do recommend creating an inventory because it gives you this bird's eye view of what have you got so that you can reuse stuff rather than having to think about recreating everything individually. Also, one of our instruction librarians is pretty new to the team, and so the inventory really helped him get a feel for what all we actually have out there. So I know what you're thinking. Please, not another spreadsheet, right? If your library is anything like mine, you're living with spreadsheets galore right now, and I apologize. If anybody can think of a better way to do an inventory of online instructional materials, let me know. But in the meantime, I am recommending a spreadsheet. In ours, we've got separate sheets for YouTube, for the stuff we've got up there, because we have like 100 videos in YouTube. We also have 2 of our librarians have been experimenting this summer with using Canvas Studio. So we started tracking, what's built in Canvas, what pages are in there, or perhaps your university is using Blackboard or some other solution. We're also tracking LibGuides, our subject guides, topic guides, course pages, because, when we're thinking about delivering online instructional materials, a lot of times we think of just video content, but actually like the basic LibGuides are instructional materials and can be delivered that way as well. And then we track on what's in LibGuide, what's in LibWizard, excuse me, or some of you might be using like Articulate, Storyline, or some other interactive solution. And then we started tracking all of our handouts and worksheets that we've built out with the idea of doing them face-to-face, right? So we've got one that's called Tune Up Your Research Question or something like that. But in this fall semester, a lot of students are going to be given that worksheet electronically. So we started doing that as well. Some different columns that you might think about keeping track of: the title, the link, maybe the learning outcome, right? So that's one thing that we started pulling out was, you know, what is this, what's the goal here of this tutorial? Who owns it? Which librarian's in charge of it? What courses are using it, or what professors are requesting that? And then I've kind of gone even further to say, you know, where else is this being used? So we have a number of YouTube videos that are also embedded on course pages or embedded in LibWizard. So there's this kind of circular usage of our instructional materials. And that's pretty handy just to see that. So now I'm going to talk about creating new content and how we can do that without the stress. And I think it's oftentimes it is kind of stressful, you know, when you're given, you know, I don't know what your fall is looking like, but for mine, I used to teach quite a lot of face-to-face classes, and all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to come up with solutions for, I don't know, 15 different classes or something like that in an online environment. So my suggestion to you, first and foremost, is to just, oh, hang on, let me see. There we go. Embrace your imperfections. That's like a perfect moment to mess up. Embrace your imperfection, because forget it. Just drop the notion that what you make has to be perfect. And I'll tell you a story. When I first started in this position, I gave myself a goal of creating a suite of tutorials. They were database walkthroughs. Don't anybody do this, okay? Nobody watched them, and it was like ended up being kind of a waste of time. But the story is that I kind of got in my own way by wanting the things that I was creating to be so perfect that I kind of froze up like a deer in headlights, where I was so nervous, perhaps, to make something that wasn't exactly perfect that it took me a while to get started on it. And also, I think I wasted, you know, just time. No one expects what you produce to be perfect. The faculty member that you're working with doesn't expect it to be perfect, and the students don't expect it to be perfect. If anything, I think the students are going to be so grateful to have a break from their own professors' imperfect videos this fall, that they'll gladly welcome anything you're giving them. So now I wanted to talk about some tactics, and some of these might be kind of basic for what you already know about library instruction, and some of them, like I said, maybe some of this will be useful for you. So take what you need and leave the rest. But the first thing, set yourself a time limit. Right? So let's say you've got to create some kind of instructional material, and I would suggest giving yourself 1 hour, right? In an hour, you should be able to slap together a couple of slides, if it's the slides, or you should be able to kind of walk through the library's website and show what you want to do and get your script ready. Maybe in 2 hours, you might be able to get the thing recorded and done. So set yourself a time limit. Get it done, let it be imperfect, and walk away from it, because it's not worth it to like hem and haw over every little thing. If you're struggling to come up with good language, pretend you're in front of a student. So this has been really helpful for lots of folks that maybe aren't as used to teaching in the online environment. Pretending you're in front of a student helps you get your flow, perhaps, or at least helps you maybe even adopt a little bit more of a conversational tone, which I think students appreciate as they're watching through any tutorials. So just pretend you're in front of a student, and you know, if you're trying to teach keywords, pretend you're in front of an undergraduate student and just tell them what you need to tell them. Get input from your colleagues. Now this is really important, but I do recommend, if we're talking about a recorded video, that you get input before you record the thing, because if you do it afterwards, your colleagues are just going to tell you it's great because they recognize how much time and energy goes into recording something. So get the feedback before you record, otherwise you're not going to get feedback at all. This does take a certain amount of kind of putting your self-consciousness aside and owning your imperfection a little bit. But most recently, I kind of took over one of my instruction meetings and I was like, sorry to do this, but I'm going to run through this tutorial that I was building. It's called Source Types and Their Function Within Research. And I walked through my slides and all my images. And of course, they still said it was great because I've got very supportive colleagues. But if you pick it apart a little bit and say, well, but what do you think about this wording? And what do you think about this image? Does this make sense to you? So that by the end of that 20 or 30 minutes that I hijacked from the meeting, I felt really confident and I was able to record the thing. And I know that it was pretty well put together. Don't worry about making it short, right? So this might go against some best practices that I know because I've read all the best practices on creating instructional materials. And they always say 3 minutes or less or something like that. But you know what? I say, suck it up. You're in college. And if I have to make something that's 8 minutes, so be it. You're going to have to watch something that's 8 minutes long because there's only so much we can do in 3 minutes. For example, my source types thing. I had made this a couple years ago. I did the source types video that was 2 minutes long, and it went over popular versus scholarly versus trade and their characteristics. And it was 2 minutes, and it was really animated and flashy. But you know what? My students, after taking that tutorial, weren't able to accurately tell me which, evaluate sources, right? So they were looking at the New York Times and calling it a magazine. Or they're looking at an organizational website and telling me it's scholarly because it's written by a doctor. So clearly, my 2-minute video was failing. So don't worry so much about making it short. I have since replaced that video with my 8 or 9 minute source types and their function within research video. And I think that the learning outcomes are going to come through a lot more. So, you know, I'm not advocating that you sit there and talk for 30 minutes in a video, but I am saying don't worry so much about making it slick and short. I would say not everything needs to be video. Again, these are college students, and so thinking about, you know, the fact that it is helpful to chunk out your content. So, you know, maybe you make a video about source types, but then you have them read something afterwards about keywords. That works just fine. My students are able to read, I have like a 2-page PDF that I give them about parsing out keywords and coming up with synonyms and things like that. And they're able to afterwards parse out their own topics without any issue. So not everything needs to be video, and you can require them to kind of read things in between video content. Plus, I think they're going to be a little videoed out this fall. I do recommend creating a quiz that forces your students through all the way to the end of your content. Now, I'm lucky enough to have, like, my university pays for LibWizard, so that lets you embed some content, and then it has the quiz over on the left-hand side. But in the past, before I had that software, I used to just be really explicit, you know, step 1, watch this video. Step 2, take this quiz. And the quiz, maybe I built out of Qualtrics or whatever solution for quizzes that the university was paying for. And that works out just fine. I mean, it's a little bit more disjointed, but I think the goal here is that you make a quiz or some kind of questionnaire that forces them all the way to the end, especially if your video isn't super short. So finding and reusing content, again, don't reinvent the wheel, right? I would recommend that if you've got stuff already that's created, so we have 2 or 3 different ways that we teach keywords that's already created, I'm just going to plug those in, even if maybe the subject matter is a little bit off, right? So I've got a keyword tutorial that's, the example is self-driving cars and ethics, and I'm going to plug that same tutorial into a psychology class this fall, and I think it's going to be just fine. So feel free to reuse content that's already created in your collection or borrow stuff, right? So in the past, I have on YouTube found excellent databases versus Google, or what is a database, how to read a scholarly article, evaluating sources for credibility, what other, oh, how to write a literature review, those things. People have already done it, so just go and borrow it. Even if it's not branded with your university library, I think that that's okay, right? And I think students learn just fine as long as the content is there. I've also had really good luck with the LibGuides community. So especially when it comes to phrasing research concepts, I tend to borrow. I borrow all the time. So recently I made a course page for my psychology research methods students, and I borrowed some language that was really well written that was all about empirical research. So I definitely suggest go out to LibGuides. I tend to always email those librarians that I'm borrowing from and let them know, hey, I'm going to take your content and I'm going to give you some attribution or whatever it is. Another suggestion is the ACRL instruction section does Primo, the site of the month. It used to be individual tutorials, but now it's a full site. So it tends to be suites of tutorials that are really well done, or full information literacy courses. And so you can go there to kind of steal ideas like how to phrase things and things like that. And then lastly, you are welcome to borrow from me. Now, again, I'm not saying this to say my tutorials are perfect, because we've already established that they are not. But here's my tutorial website, and I have these database tip sheets, which are not, they're just screenshots with instructions and a couple of examples of some of the interactive tutorials that I've created. And you're welcome to email me if you want anything else, or if you need a pep talk, right? Yeah, I think you guys can all get through the semester. So I don't think you can click on these links here. And I think what we're going to do, Mark was saying, is we can email the links in 24 hours or whatever it is when you get your thank you for participating in this workshop. You'll see those links come along through your email. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie. Where I work here in Florida, I'm the dean of the library, so a lot of what I've been involved with over the past several months has been keeping the library going when we've physically been closed, and also creating a plan to reopen, because we realized soon after we closed back in March that we would need some sort of a plan to phase us back into some kind of a service, some kind of a physical service, knowing that this virus was not going to go away. So creating a reopening plan was kind of our main job. Put together a small group of staff and myself, and we created a plan with lots and lots of help. So I'm going to go through a little bit of that process and the types of things that are in the plan. So talk about the plan itself, about space reconfiguration, about policies and protocols, some of our services that we've offered and the collections and how they've been used and how they've changed to a certain extent, and a little bit about the future, because I think that's very important moving forward, because I think we're headed into a new reality. Okay, let's get the right slide up. There we go. Okay, so the plan itself, safety is the primary goal. Unlike our normal mode of operations where we think of service really primarily, we certainly don't ignore safety, but now we're looking at a very different concept of what a library is, and it's a place that first and foremost has to be safe. In creating our plan, and I know many of my colleagues have had the same process going, linking to the campus plan. Most campuses have some kind of a plan for reopening. Some of those plans are very detailed, very organized, some a little bit less so, but it's very important that the library plan be linked to that plan using some of the same measures, some of the same protocols and processes. Also, if you have an overarching administration, for example, here in Florida, our state universities are governed by a board of governors, and that board came out with a plan that sort of drove the campus plans, which of course are driving the library plans. Engaging staff was very important. I mentioned that we formed a committee. It was a small committee, but it was representative of the entire staff, and that committee was really developed to create and implement the plan. and just as importantly, to communicate internally and externally about how the plan was going and what the future was looking like, what the prognosis was. We're also looking to our colleagues. We have a sort of a mini consortium here in Sarasota of about 4 academic libraries, and we've been contacting each other and sharing some things. But also more broadly at the state level, we actually created a Principles for Reopening Libraries document among the deans of the state university libraries, and that's been extremely helpful. Borrowing ideas from others I mean, that's the order of the day for librarians to begin with. And certainly now where there's not much scholarly literature on how to deal with pandemics in libraries, that's sort of a play-as-you-go type of environment. But much information is coming out pretty rapidly. If you're on listservs or read blogs, read some of the other types of literature. There's also things coming down from the CDC and other scientific and medical organizations that you need to pay attention to. So what are the things that are being discovered about this virus, and what are the best practices for helping to alleviate it? Plans should also cover certain details. For example, what about your spaces? How are you going to reconfigure them? Study rooms. We have a number of group study rooms in our library. They're, at least temporarily, they will no longer be group study rooms, and instead they'll be singular study rooms. We have a large group study room that we're now using for storage for furniture that we're not going to be using. Over the past several years, we purchased more and more collaborative type of furniture, and of course, that's not what you want in this particular case. We're interestingly trying to separate students when for many years we're trying to bring them together. One detail that we've been going back and forth on is our water fountains. We hope that students are going to spend some time in the library, perhaps not as much as they had in the past, but maybe a few hours during the course of the day. But water fountains are a very bad place when it comes to viruses. So we've decided to turn our water fountains off. We're eliminating communal coffee pots. That's a tough one, certainly for staff, but even for students who sometimes enjoy coffee with us. And also, interestingly enough, restrooms have become a bit of an issue. How do we sort of make sure that they don't become traffic jams where people are bumping into each other? Also, being flexible with these plans is extremely important. We've already had to make a number of changes with our plans. You may discover also that there are more effective and perhaps efficient ways to accomplish something by sharing information with colleagues and with others. The plan, and most plans that I've seen, reopen in phases. We're not in a situation where the virus has gone away and we can come back in and turn the lights on and unlock the doors and we're ready for business. This is a very, very different paradigm. So we had to create phases throughout the course of the summer. And in fact, we were stuck in the early phases of our plan because here in Florida, our numbers had gone through the roof. We kind of became an epicenter for the virus. But now, of course, we're a week or so away from students arriving back on campus, and we have to be ready for them. Also, having alternative plans at the ready, a plan B or a plan C, is also possible, and that may come to us if, for example, we have to again abandon campus at some point during the semester, which is not out of the realm of possibility. We'll need at least another plan for that. Space configuration is an important part of our plan. Where are we going to install safety barriers? For example, we have plexiglass that's been installed all around of our service desk. It's about 8 feet tall, and when our physical plant folks were here and we were discussing this, I wanted to make sure that it was high enough so that our staff felt secure in working with the public and in dealing with the public. Room dividers, separate spaces for staff, that kind of a thing. Furniture, we've managed to eliminate a lot of our furniture. We had some old furniture from the 1980s, a lot of which we were able to jettison. Some of it we didn't really need anyway. And some of our newer furniture we put into storage and we've moved it out. We've reduced our seating capacity about 60%. For us, we serve primarily a small liberal arts college and a branch campus of a research university. So we don't have a huge population to deal with, but I know some of my colleagues at large institutions are dealing with a real issue of libraries that normally see thousands and thousands of students every day, and how are they going to deal with reduced seating capacity. There are some products out there. For example, SpringShare has a product called Seats that you can actually reserve a seat in the library. So something like that. Interestingly, we used to have the reservation systems for computers. Now even seats are going to be at a premium. Study spaces and study rooms. As I mentioned before, we've eliminated group study rooms. We've created single study rooms and also spaces that were collaborative spaces before. We've eliminated, moved a lot of that furniture out. Created tables with single chairs on them. Signage has become an extraordinarily important part of what we do, making sure we get the message out. A lot of our signage will be consistent with campus signage. What we're really trying to do is to create a behavior, to create a culture. And to do that, you really can't do it singularly as a library. It has to be in concert with the rest. So we want to have signage that's consistent with the campus, visible signage, and not too much signage. As you know, when you see those bulletin boards on campus with thousands of flyers on them, no one reads anything. Technology, we are removing some computers. We're being very careful about that to create space to socially distance. We're putting up barriers between some computers, plexiglass and other kinds of barriers. And as before, I mentioned restrooms. We had a project slated for this summer to remodel all of our restrooms. That's been put off until the end of the fall semester, but our plan is to create touchless restrooms. It would have been ideal if we had that ready for the fall semester. And I also mentioned about water, turning water fountains off and perhaps providing other ways that students can get water from us. Now for our policies and procedures, one thing that is going to be consistent on our campus, and in fact in our city, we have an ordinance, a mask ordinance. Masks are required indoors in public spaces. So we're going to require masks. We're going to require social distancing. It's difficult to conceive of how we're going to enforce that, but we're certainly going to try our hardest to do it. And encourage hand washing, and with a lot of signage around that, that indicates that that's an important thing. We're going from a library that encouraged food and drink to one that won't allow it, at least temporarily. Obviously, if you're going to have a mask policy, you can't be eating and drinking at the same time. I know a lot of larger institutions are closing their cafes and turning off their vending machines. Our hours are going to be limited, in part because our staff, we're going to be scheduling our staff in different ways, but also this is as I say to my staff, this is an art and not a science, and we're going to see how we can, I won't use the word police, but how we can monitor this and assure a safe environment for our students. As far as our staff are concerned, their office doors are to remain closed. We're going to be insisting on distancing, that we won't be meeting in any considerable numbers of groups. Face masks and face shields will be worn by our staff at our service desk. I think that's very important. Our meetings, of course, over the past several months have become virtual, and they will remain virtual for the foreseeable future. We won't have much in the way of in-person meetings. I mentioned before that we're staggering the schedules of our staff so that people aren't coming and going all at the same time, that there's an opportunity to continue to socially distance. And also our cleaning protocols have been up considerably. We're having a much more intensive cleaning regimen being done in the evenings. And during the day, we're providing supplies so that students can wipe down their tables and their seats before and after usage. Our services and our collections have changed somewhat. I mean, we've always had some kind of virtual services that have been available. Virtual reference has become much more popular. We had a virtual reference service in the past. We sort of sunsetted it a few years ago. Our students didn't find it as amenable as visiting in person with a librarian. But we use Google Meet and Zoom. We have access to both of those. And our instruction is largely being done through our LMS, which happens to be Canvas. Our online guides, LibGuides, we're using to communicate what's available to users. This, continues to change. We continue to nuance this as the situation changes. We're co-locating links to digital resources and digital services. And we're using this in concert with our website, with our social media, with email, so that we're communicating with our users in many ways, and that we're continuing to keep the library in their minds, that we still want to be of great value to all of our users. And finally, digital collections. Our print materials are still being used, but when they come back, we're quarantining them for 72 hours. So we're looking, again, more at digitizing things. We're doing a little bit of digitizing on demand, not a whole lot. We don't have the resource to do a lot, and also we're really trying to heed fair use as much as possible. We've seen an uptick in streaming video demand. A lot of faculty are much more interested in using things to try to engage their students. Our faculty principally were face-to-face teachers before all of this happened, and now suddenly they're thrust to an online environment, and it's going to be very challenging for them. We're looking at mailing some print collection items to users who will not be back on campus. This is, of course, a first for us. We're a residential liberal arts college. But we will have a population of students, we don't know exactly what percentage now, but they will be residing at their homes or elsewhere. Many may be out of state, so we're going to have to find ways to get them materials. We have been taking advantage of the increased content that's been offered by many publishers. That's been, in many ways, a godsend to us. Our faculty have appreciated that very much. And we've really focused more on acquiring ebooks, something that was pretty much resisted at this institution up until recently. And now I think we've made some headway with that. And finally, the future, a few things that we'll continue doing, I fully suspect. Our virtual reference and instruction, I think, is perhaps here to stay for at least a little while, if not permanently. I think that the students have become used to it. I think that they're getting something out of it now, and they appreciate it. I think we'll see greater use of instructional video, video on demand, where our librarians are now creating more videos for classes and things. Our digital collections will continue to grow, much more so than our print collections. I think we've begun to turn the corner on the print world at least a little bit. There are still things in the print world that we will acquire. Social distancing and masks, I believe, will be with us for quite some time. And cleaning will be with us, I'm hopeful. It's always good to have a clean library, and this may be that opportunity to really up the ante on cleaning. Some of the things that will likely change, we're certainly seeing less print reserve material, and perhaps we're seeing that begin to truly tail off. Going more to open access materials, we've really tried to encourage the use of that over the years, and now we've seen, I think, an uptick in that, and we hope to see that continue to grow. One of the things we really hope for is a return to a collaborative library, a library where students are working together. That we really were focused on for many years, and it's very difficult for us to sort of turn away from that. And also to resume our events and our exhibits. They've been very popular, and it's something that we won't be doing very much of for the foreseeable future. And finally, the new normal. I suspect that people will continue to be wary about being in public with lots of people around. I think this will be one of the effects, longer term effects of this pandemic. Video conferencing technologies have certainly come of age, and I think they will be with us even more so getting into the future. We'll see lots more in the way of conferences and things. Our electronic collections have certainly become more accepted at our institution. I imagine that's probably true for others. And I think the real downside, and we've yet to see the effects of this, is our new fiscal realities. We're a state institution, and we've already seen one round of budget cuts, and we're suspecting that there will be another that will come shortly after the election, and then the legislature will meet yet again in spring to determine our budget for the following year, and things could get rather challenging at that point. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. We have a little time here at the end for some questions, and I see that we've had plenty of questions come in through the chat and the Q&A. So let me put just a couple of those to our speakers today. So maybe we'll stick with you, Brian, for a moment here. And I wonder, there were a couple of questions that came in about water fountains and using them and the need to provide water. And I think you mentioned sort of in passing that you were looking at other ways potentially of providing water to patrons as they come in. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Do you have plans to use bottles or other sorts of things?
We may turn to bottled water. I know that some of the large warehouse retailers sell big quantities of water relatively cheaply. Again, I mentioned too that we're looking at budget cuts, so we don't have a lot of money for things, but I really understand, we want students to be in the library for at least a couple of hours, and it's rather difficult without water. As I understand, our campus is still trying to figure out whether water fountains should be on or off. Our thinking is it's just a little bit too dangerous. We don't want, at the very least, we don't want the library to be pointed at when the question is, where did you get the virus? We want to be as safe an environment as possible. I think our big thing too is, and this will hit our staff, is the lack of at least internally of having public coffee pots. Now, some staff have some coffee pots in their office, which is perfectly fine. But those little details actually matter. One of the things that we, over the years started to encourage more and more students bringing food into the library is in part because we wanted them to spend long periods of time there. And in order to do that, you're more comfortable and more prepared to work when you're not hungry. So this will be a pretty dramatic shift for us.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a different way of thinking about using the library. Absolutely. We've got a little more time, so let me take another question that we've got here, and maybe this one I'll send over to you, Natalie. I think we have a couple of questions in here for you. Yep, so one question that it looks like you responded to in the chat, but I wondered if you could talk about it a little bit, is when you're using YouTube videos and things like that, how do you deal with the copyright issues that you may run into, or is that not something you think about because you use it under fair use? What is your thinking there?
Yeah, so I think that my standard is that I tend to just always, if somebody has put their name on something, I always drop them a line and say, hey, I'm going to use this thing, even if they put a CC BY license on it. Inside of YouTube, when you post your videos, you do have the opportunity under like advanced options to switch it from a standard license, which is like fully copyrighted license, to a CC BY, which is like the attribution license. So for my videos, when I post things, I switch it to CC BY automatically, and a lot of other libraries already post that way anyway. As far as it being fair use, I honestly do think it falls under fair use anyway. But if you wanted to like avoid any complications with copyright, you know, just reach out to the institution that posted the video. Then most of the time, librarians are so flattered that you want to use their stuff that they're like happy to give it to you, and they don't even care if you you know, give them attribution. I mean, there's some prickly folks out there that really want the attribution, but yeah, I think it's just common courtesy to drop people a line if you're going to use their stuff. So hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And I think we'll take maybe just one last question here. And let me see, I think we had a couple of questions at the beginning for Rossana. Let's see. We had a question that came through, yes, for you, Rossana, a little earlier in the presentation that was about publishers. And it says, does that mean that actually physical books were not published, but that digital sales increased? Could you talk a little bit about that? I see you've put an answer in the written chat there.
Yes, yeah. Yes, books, in some cases, for sure, were planned to be published in these months, but in the months between the 8th of March to the 18th of May, anyway to May, all activities were closed. So publishers' offices were closed, printers were closed, all the chain of publication was closed for Italian publishers, of course, but they could buy foreign books or anyway books published before. But the data that I showed, that maybe I was not clear when talking about Arianna. Arianna is a platform that is addressed to bookshops, not to people. So there was a decrease of 70% in the using the acquisitions in Arianna because bookshops were closed, so they couldn't buy from Arianna. So of course there was the two things are separated. I mean, Italian publishers couldn't publish because it was all closed, but anyway, and so bookshops couldn't buy from Italian publishers, but maybe they could buy to sell online because they were closed by other publishers, and people could buy from, of course, from many platforms, whatever they want, which was not published in these 2 months, of course. I hope it's clearer now. I hope.
Yeah, I think that helps. I think that helps clear it up. Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right. So we've gone even a little bit over our scheduled hour. I apologize for that. I would just remind folks out there that you should see a link to a quick survey to let us know what you thought of this webinar. We take that information and use it to try and make the webinars better. So if you have just an extra minute or two, we'd really appreciate your taking a moment to fill out that survey. And I just want to say, of course, thank you to each of our presenters, to Rossana and Natalie and Brian. There's a lot of notes coming through the chat letting us know that folks out there really enjoyed the presentation. They found it useful and informative. So thank you so much for taking the time to present. We really appreciate it. All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks everyone.